And I want to start this podcast with maybe the 2 or 3 defining turning points in your biography that linked you to the realm of psychedelics. Super curious to listen in.
Well, hi, thank you so much for having me. The psychedelic renaissance is in full effect in a very nascent and early stage. And I ultimately got involved in sacred plant medicines in my early 20s. I'm in my mid 40s now, so it was about 22 years ago. I started one of the first healing centers dedicated to Amazonian plant medicine, which also included the sacred plant medicines that were indigenous to the Amazon. But it's important to also focus that it wasn't just about psychoactive plants, but really the entire pantheon of plant medicine that's expressed by the medico-vegetalistas, or the healers of the forest. And in my life, ultimately, I think the key characteristics are that I came from a scientific background. I came from a family that was Western medical, with a father who was a surgeon, a mother who was a nurse. My brother's an attorney in Silicon Valley. And so when I ended up going to the Amazon and seeking these kinds of medicines and knowledge, I came at it from a perspective that was both observational and experiential. And I wasn't looking for a miracle so much as looking for real knowledge that I thought was still out there. I thought that somebody had to have seen through the veil, and that ancient cultures that we're still living today might be the means in which to actually discover the people that were still carrying that knowledge from the ancient people to today. And I thought that this might be the last generation that would have that knowledge, and it could die out, and that it needed to be discovered, and if discovered, preserved. I went to the Amazon. That's the second huge turning point in my life, actually going to the Amazon and participating in my first ceremonies, where all of the dreams and visions that I had about that journey ultimately manifested and came true on a tiny river, 24 hours from the nearest city and any kind of Western support, in an area where they're upriver from us were literally no inhabitants. And I was told in that first visions that I would actually live there and study there. So that location became an unbelievably important place for me, because it was where I left my Western life and started an Amazonian indigenous life in my early 20s, and also gained the training that helped me cross over that veil that I was looking to see through into the plant medicine space, but in the formal trainings of an apprenticeship to a lineage that had been passed on for literally thousands of years, from just one family member to another, to another, to another, that had survived the conquests and the introduction of Western culture and thinking into that part of the Amazon. And so to go through that experience was very transformational, in the sense of I had gone through Western education through the university, and now I was going into an apprenticeship education, and I got to see literally 2 different minds and 2 different ways of treating knowledge. And then I think the third part of it was a huge community that formed around our work, which wasn't expected. I thought at best maybe people would come to us for transformation and healing. I wanted to share the plant medicine that I had been shown with the rest of the world, but I didn't know that it was going to create a movement. I didn't know that it was going to spark the Neos Shamanic revolution, or maybe phase 1 of the psychedelic renaissance. I didn't know that people would care and come back over and over again. I didn't know the relationships that we would ultimately form as a community, both through specifically Blue Morpho, our organization and community, but then also all of the organizations and communities that formed around these practices. I didn't know that the publicity that we got would spark many different lineages to open up and express themselves into the world and start to share their medicine, because it became a means of surviving and representing their culture and their knowledge. And so being part of that was, I think, something that was truly transformational and very special. I consider it a tremendous honor, but also one of the reasons why I've kind of, since COVID, come out of the shadows to start talking a little bit more about what's going on in this, perceived third wave, and to share some real information, or at least as real as I can, about what's taking place, just so people have a better understanding, less propaganda, and more capacity to make good decisions about how to navigate this.
What specific ripple effects do you see when you look at the, let's say, closer community in Peru, but also in other countries?
Yeah, I think the hardest thing about it is that you can't differentiate online very easily between one group and another. And so when digital marketing came into the space around 2004, 2005, became really strong in 2006, all of a sudden there were many places online offering different kinds of sacred plant ceremonies. And it really became about the plants that were visionary, like you mentioned, ayahuasca, peyote, San Pedro, iboga, et cetera. It became really about the substance, not about the practices, and about the transformation that people were having. Ultimately, what happened is, like any unregulated industry, an industry formed, first of all, really quickly, which I was shocked and surprised by, and not a proponent for. I thought that this was really something that was like an anthropological niche around traditional medicines, and something about sharing that transformational power with the people. I didn't see this as a, quote, part of the psychedelic renaissance. But what ultimately happened was that out of the woodwork, as soon as there was interest and demand from a financial side, there were people offering these experiences everywhere. And there was a real degradation in the understanding of the training necessary to be able to have these experiences. For instance, when I was trained, you were not allowed to touch the bottle of ayahuasca, literally even touch it, until it was handed to you by the master practitioner or master shaman, who is called a médico vegetalista. So shaman doesn't really apply. They're like doctors of the forest. So this doctor has his medicine like a pharmacist has medicines, and only with a prescription do you actually get it given to you for the purpose of ingesting. That was gone. A Western drug culture started to form around this, like, hey, take this through the trip, you're going to get better. And fundamentally, that was not how it was presented to me. It was presented to me like an unbelievably powerful medicine that could be used for good and actual healing, or it could be used for all different reasons that may not produce the actual transformation that you were looking for. The negative consequences of that are drastic. You know, people having really negative experiences and feeling like they can't come out of them. On the positive side of it, you had, you know, the opening of these medicines to the Western world and a way for the locals to actually be able to support their communities through this knowledge that they had. The negative side of it was that charlatans from everywhere showed up, just everywhere. And then the worst part of it really was that they were using the same word to describe the substances that they were working with. Like the way we make what we call ayahuasca is a recipe that was passed down for thousands of years, one generation to the next, and it was improved upon. And it's very consistent. And you know what's in it, and you know how it's created, and you know that it's safe to be able to drink. And you know that it doesn't have in it any other kinds of admixtures that could make it dangerous. All of a sudden, there was a market for the substance itself, which to us was literal insanity. And people were buying that and having all the negatives that you would hear about from the psychedelic community happening when you all of a sudden took this visionary substance and it was so intense and people didn't know how to navigate it. So the charlatans came out of everywhere. It was very hard to differentiate online who was promoting actual real practices that came from known lineages compared to people that just came out of the woodwork and were ultimately just selling their services as if it were what I called a glorified bartender. So to put it in perspective, for us to graduate, we had to go through anywhere from 5 to 15 years of training. And it depended on how fast an individual could learn. Now, all of a sudden in the market, there were people who literally had no training other than maybe learning how to make a tea and selling this tea as if they were a full-fledged practitioner.